3 Lives, 3 Worlds, Lotus Steps. Wherever step goes, lotus blooms. Divine Prayer. By Tangqi, English translated using Google. Lotus Step Chapter 33, Book 2. Emperor Donghua is a very pure god, and the 2 places where he always lives, the Taichen Palace in the 9 heavens and the blue seat sangling at the end of the sky, are not very welcoming to guests. Emperor Tianjun Sijing knew the emperor's rules and had never gone to Taichen Palace to disturb the emperor since he came to the throne. But today, Emperor Xiaizheng appeared at the gate of Taichen Palace. To be fair, Emperor Xiaizheng was a diligent and wise emperor, and he was always capable of handling affairs in Bahuang. He had never asked the emperor to clean up his mess for him in the 20,000 years since he took the throne. He was considered a relatively easy emperor to lead. But now this matter is a bit tricky for Emperor Xiaizheng. Here's the thing. The return of the god of light, Zhu Ti, shook the 8 wastelands. Emperor Xiaizheng used a fire, viewing mirror to explore the place where the god of light had returned, and found that it was the Tangqi mountain in the North Pole. The god of light is an ancient god who enjoys an honorable position among the gods. When the god of light returns, he should be welcomed with the most solemn respect. To this end, Emperor Xiaizheng specially sent the Sun Star, the Moon Star, the Sui Star, the Yinglua Star, and the Zhen Star. Xing, Taibai Xing, and Qinxing, the lords of the 7 stars, led 49 immortal uncles to the North Pole Tangqi mountain to greet the god of light. Qiyo Xingjuan was very excited after receiving this fate. He led the honor guard and rushed to Tangqi mountain with excitement. He thought he could see the true face of the legendary ancient god, but he searched all over Tangqi mountain, and no trace of the god of light was found. The stars were dumbfounded. It would definitely not work if we just went back empty-handed to deliver the business. When he was at a loss what to do, Mr. Taibai Xing remembered that His Highness the Third Highness was serving his sentence at the 2nd peak of the sky, Arkansas. He should have seen he miracle of the god of light and might know the whereabouts of the god of light. As if they had grasped a life-saving straw, the star lords rushed to the bottom of the 2nd peak in an instant to inquire about the information from His Highness the Third. Unexpectedly, His Highness said that after those 2 spells, the sound of the girl's bell and the golden light symbolizing Zhu Ti's return soon disappeared from the sky above the sky cabinet. He never saw Zhu Ti's figure from the beginning to the end, and I don't know where she went after leaving the Tangqi. His Highness the Third Prince didn't seem too concerned about this matter. After talking to them for a few words, he asked the guarding general on the side how many times he would be punished by the blade in the remaining 10 hours. Everyone was not blind. They all heard that this was an order to expel guests, but they really didn't know who else to pry with, so they still shamelessly stayed there, begging His Highness to think again and provide them with some more clues. Probably they were really annoyed, so His Highness gave them a suggestion before being tortured again, saying that they heard that the god Zhu Ti was aloof and did not like to interact with others. Since they had missed the god Zhu Ti who had just returned, it would be difficult for them to deliberately look for him again. Found. The only person in the 8 wastelands who could talk to Zhu Ti was Emperor Donghua. If they were determined to find Zhu Ti, they might as well go to the emperor for 13 days for advice. Then they were sent away. The 7 star lords felt that what His Highness the Third Highness said was reasonable, but of course they did not dare to go to the emperor themselves, so they reported the matter to the Heavenly Lord as soon as they returned to Juzongshan. This is the reason why Tianjun is standing in front of the emperor at this time. Beside the Fengelai pond, the emperor was hanging bait on the fishhook while listening to the Heavenly Lord explain his purpose. The emperor didn't have much reaction, he just said, "So what if we find her?" Tianjun replied solemnly, "Goddess Zhu Ti, after all, she is the revered god of my divine clan." The emperor threw the fishhook into the distance. In terms of clan status, Zhu Ti is indeed a god. However, she has never entered the swamp, is not a disciple of Father God, and has never accepted Mo Yuan's invitation to be the new god's flower master, so she actually has no connection with the current god clan. He glanced at Tianjun and said, "You asked Qiao Xingjun to greet her because you wanted to tell Bahuang that the celestial clan would give her the status of the leader of Xingyao. From now on, She will be the god of the celestial clan, right? Emperor Xiaozheng indeed had this plan, and it was embarrassing to have his thoughts exposed so bluntly. The emperor thinks, "This is inappropriate." The emperor put down the fishing rod and poured himself a cup of tea. The status of the god of light does not need to be recognized by any race. No matter how the 5 races view her, she is the OD of light in this world, and the 9 stars will be governed by her laws. Restraint. As long as the Star Lords who are currently in charge of Xingyao do not act against their will, she will not interfere with their operations. In this way, whether she is a god of the Celestial Clan will not hinder the Celestial Clan's command of Xingyao, so you really don't need to do anything unnecessary. Tianjun was silent for a moment, but after all, God Zuti and God Shaowan were on good terms that day. God Shaowan is the supreme leader of the Demon Clan. If God Zuti is attracted by the Demon Clan, it may be detrimental to our god race. When Tianjun was young, he studied with the emperor for several days. Although the emperor never allowed Tianjun to treat him as a disciple, he was a teacher for a lifetime. Tianjun always followed the emperor's etiquette very well, so Tianjun was confused. The emperor is not as precious as others, and he can say a few more words. In the prehistoric era, the emperor said, Zunti is the only important goddess who has never been involved in the war between the 5 races. Since she was originally the ant who has lived in seclusion for 100,000 years has not been attracted by any clan, so she will not be attracted by other clans today. Shaowan was able to invite her out of the ant at that time, not because the two were on good terms, but because she saw her own destiny. There are very few records about Zuti in history books, and Tianjun doesn't know much about this goddess. At this time, he was surprised to hear the emperor mention the truth about Zuti leaving Gugu in the prehistoric era. Although he was surprised, he was still a little suspicious. According to the emperor, God Zuti is a detached and reclusive god with no desires, and he doesn't like to meddle in other people's business. But why is the first thing that God Zuti does after his return? What about setting down 2 spells to change the laws of heaven and earth? This doesn't look like someone who doesn't mind other people's business. The emperor recalled the 2 mantras. All things are born when light shines on them. If light exists, everything in the world will never be destroyed. When a fish bit the hook, he picked up the fishing rod and said while handling the fat carp that bit the hook in the past, when the gods and the ghosts fought. The ghost king Qingtsang sacrificed the Eastern Emperor Bel in order to destroy the 8 desolations and bury all living beings with him. If this law of the god of light was there at that time, there would be no need to be afraid of Qingtsang using the 8 desolations. All living things threaten each other, but because of the existence of light, all things are immortal. This mantra is the loving kindness of the returned god of light to this world. How can it be just meddling in other people's business? Listening to the emperor's explanation, Tianjun couldn't help but feel ashamed of his own narrow-mindedness. The emperor released the caught carp back into the pond and continued, 8 billion mortals are protected by Gugu, and all living creatures in the 8 wastelands, if they have any ill intentions towards the human race, are not allowed to pass through the Ruomi Gate. Back then, before Zuti sacrificed chaos for the human race, she had established a new order of heaven and earth with Mo Yuan, and agreed that the human race would live forever in 1 billion mortal worlds and be protected by the gods. He thought for a moment, now she has established this as soon as she comes back. This new spell probably comes from the feeling that the gods have not protected the human race enough over the years. Hearing the emperor's irresponsible guess, Tianjun, who had always felt that he had done an almost perfect job in governing billions of mortals, was a little bit depressed. Does the emperor also feel that I have not done enough to protect the human race? The emperor didn't realize at all what kind of pressure he put on Tianjun with his casual words. Yun Danfeng said, "Oh, softly. That's not true. You did a good job." He continued to guess irresponsibly. Maybe it's Sudi who is too strict. After saying this, he glanced at Zhongtian and said, "Okay, that's it, it's almost meal time." The emperor's topic changed too quickly, and Tianjun was still in a state of ups and downs in his mind. He didn't follow him for a moment and could only instinctively thank him, then thank you, Emperor, for leaving the meal. The voice of thanks sounded together with the emperor's next sentence. It's almost time to go back. Tianjun. Tianjun clutched his chest and left. After Tianjun left, the emperor looked at the clouds on the horizon and fell into thinking. Just as he had just said with Tianjun, Zhu Ti's first mantra was to leave fire for the 8 wastelands. Even if the 8 wastelands were overturned, all living beings would still be immortal. Among the 8 wilderness and 4 seas, only the 3 creator gods, the 4 protector gods, and the 5 nature gods can set laws for the world. The 3 creator gods are Panga God, Father God, and Shawan. The 4 protector gods are Mo Yuan and Mo Yuan's younger brother who doesn't know when he will be born, Shilua from the western Brahma realm, plus him. The 5 nature gods are Earth Mother and Nuwa, God of Light Zhu Ti, God of Fire Xieming, Lord of Wind Sergia, as well as the water god who was born from the new god Jifeng, and the boy Liansong who is still being tortured under the 2nd peak of the sky cabinet. Among these 12 gods, 5 have become immortals and 2 have fallen asleep. One is too young, and the other has simply not been born yet. The only ones who are alive and well and able to impose laws on this world are Shilua and himself, plus a newly returned Zhu Ti. However, imposing laws on the world is a matter that requires extreme caution, as it consumes a huge amount of spiritual energy and cultivation. The more majestic the spell is, the greater the drain on spiritual power. For Zhu Ti to cast such a majestic spell on the world when she had just returned, and when she was weak, it would probably consume all her spiritual power. Why did you exhaust your spiritual power to establish the spell for heaven and earth? Is it because you foresee that there will be another great disaster in Bahuang? The emperor rubbed his forehead in a rare moment. It was inappropriate for others to get involved in this matter, but he really needed to go see Zhu Ti. The Arctic sky cabinet is covered with white snow, and thousands of snow lotuses bloom in fact, Zhu Ti did not leave Tiangui Mountain, and the 7 Star Lords could not find her. However, after setting the spell, she was too weak, so she opened a small space under the 1st peak of Tiangui. Just go and rest in a small space. Emperor Donghua's guess was correct. As soon as Father Guang returned to the throne, she immediately made 2 spells. This was because she foresaw that Nei Ba Huang was about to usher in an unprecedented catastrophe. When Zhu Ti returned to her position, her immortal body reunited in the light. In addition to the memories of being the god of light, her ability to predict was also revived in this body. She foresaw the disaster. The moment she opened her eyes, in the endless dazzling light, she saw what the world would look like 30,000 years later. The flames of war that started from nowhere caused the world to overturn. The heavens were destroyed, and the 8 wastelands were devastated and devastated. The Red Land is full of hungry people, mourning is everywhere, and there is no trace of the paradise of the fairyland in the world. In the past, the purgatory-like mortal world derived from the petals of the pot-shaped flower that fed on the immortal corpse of Pangu was nothing more than this. The god of light's ability to predict is an ability to sense revelation. When she can predict what will happen is not something she can decide, but is dictated by God's will. Fuzzy fragments passed through her mind, and she could not determine who was the instigator of this disaster. She only foresaw that it would be a war that could destroy the sky. And she once again saw her destiny. She needed to sacrifice again as the god of light in order to resolve this disaster and end this war. This is the reason why she can be resurrected. Because destiny requires her to die again. And this is the fate of the god of light. Every life is for the sake of death. It was pitch black in the small space. Zhu Ti sat quietly in the darkness. The past was like water, flowing past her eyes. She was born from the first light in the world. The first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was a sea of red lotuses in the sea of immortality. Thousands of red lotuses covered the entire eternal sea, like fire, so beautiful. She really liked them. Out of their nature to be close to light, the red lotus people became wise under her illumination and asked her curiously, "Who are you?" Her first words in this world were Tia Haizi Honglian. She stroked the petals of the red lotus and said to them innocently and gently, "I am the god of light and your protector. If you have anything to pray for, Tell me and I will satisfy you. When the god of light came to the world, the first skill she learned was the omniscience of flowers and trees, and her original intention of learning this skill was just to listen to the prayers of flowers and trees to her. From then on, she settled down in Gugu, surrounded by flowers and trees in the mountains. She has neither the 7 emotions nor the 6 desires. The flowers and trees said that she was the most innocent god in the world, but she didn't take it seriously. She thought indifferently, how many gods had they seen since they were rooted in Gugu? The flowers and trees were very naughty. Seeing that she didn't understand her, they insisted on interceding with her. Although she didn't understand, she roughly knew from the words of the flowers and trees that there were many kinds of emotions in the world, and all living beings in the world were born with rich emotions. Those like her who didn't understand anything were the exceptions. But she didn't think it was important. Besides, she thought she didn't understand everything. Maybe she knew a little bit about liking. She likes flowers and trees and loves to be with them. She not only takes care of Gugu's flowers and trees, but also occasionally goes to the fairy mountains outside Gugu to look for other exotic flowers. If those flowers and plants are willing, she will transplant them back to Gugu. She has never tired of doing so for tens of thousands of years. At that time, God the Father set up a school called Shuizhuang, Uchi Bahuang, and all the living beings of the 5 races who were somewhat famous were studying in the school. Father God also invited her to Gugu many times, but she refused. The flowers and trees felt sorry for her, saying that they heard that the water swamp was very interesting. If she went to the water swamp, she would definitely make many friends and her magic skills would become more refined. But she didn't care, she didn't want to make friends, and she didn't think that Master Shuizhuang would be more helpful to her in her spiritual practice than her precognitive dream. She is a god with the power of prediction. From time to time, she will have some prediction dreams. The content of the dream is very simple. Most of them teach her how to practice as a god of light. She occasionally predicts the future, but it is not too important. The most important thing is the dream that foresaw the future foretells her fate and the ending of her life. 100,000 years later, the last creation god in the world will open the Ruoma gate and move the human race to the mortal world. And the god of light will be here under the protection of the 4 divine envoys. Chaos was sacrificed, making the purgatory-like mortal world with mountains, rivers, vegetation, 4 seasons and 5 elements inhabited by the human race. Her heart is pure and untainted, and all things are equal in her heart, so she has no doubts about this fate. Although most creatures in the world look down on the human race and think they are weak and useless, she does not feel that the weak human race is not worthy of the life-saving protection of a creation god and a nature god. She accepted this fate calmly and followed the revelation given by the prophetic dream. She left Gugu and went to 3 fairy mountains to find and enlighten her destined 3 divine messengers. Hibiscus Yinlin from Shaoshi Mountain, Yinlin from Xianshan Mountain. The Emperor's daughter sang Shui harmonizes with the 9-color lotus frost on Dian Mountain. The last divine messenger was from a human race and had not been born at that time, but she was not in a hurry. While patiently waiting for his birth, she continued to hide in Gugu and grow flowers and grass. Then 1 year before she came of age at the age of 40,000, something happened. After enlightening the 3 divine messengers, she had stopped having precognitive dreams for a long time, but that night, she had a dream. In the dream, there was a long night, a lonely lamp, and a small wooden house. There was a simple wooden bed in the cabin, covered with white silk and satin behind heavy gauze curtains. She was lying in the middle of the silk and satin, nestling in the arms of a young man in white. The young man had sculpted eyebrows and a very beautiful face. He treated her intimately and tenderly. He gave her a set of jewelry. The bright moon shines on the red jade shadow, and the lotus heart hides the fragrance under the sleeve. These are 2 lines of poetry. Although the young man didn't say it clearly, she could tell at a glance that the set of jewelry was made of silver dragon reverse scales. The young man is a dragon king. And although she was hiding in Gugu, she also knew that she had accepted Long Jun's evil scale and wanted to be Long Jun's wife. The dream ended abruptly when she accepted Long Jun's reverse scale. Although her youth was unforgettable to her, she had no special feelings at that time. She only felt that this dream should indicate that she would marry as a woman and become the wife of a dragon king. So when it came time to choose her gender as an adult the next year, she chose to be a woman. In this way, she became a woman. Shortly after the coming-of-age ceremony, the fourth divine messenger she was waiting for was born. When the child's tribe was destroyed, she rushed to save him. Because he is the light that the human race has been waiting for many years, and is the child who will lead the human race on a new journey, she named him Jiaoxi. At this point, the important task of enlightening the four divine envoys has been completed. Next, she only needs to wait for the Creator God to come find her after knowing everything, and then follow the established destiny to complete the mission with her body and Tao. Things should have been so simple. But after that, she started to dream nonstop. Those dreams are connected to her life as a mortal woman named Chengyu. In those dreams, she was both a bystander and a participant. She watched how she, reincarnated as a mortal, met, knew, cherished, and fell in love with each other in the peaceful mortal world with the young man who had given her dragon scales in the prophetic dream. She also finally learned the identity of the young man. It turned out that he was the last nature god who would come to this world after the new god era, the water god. According to the known destiny, before the new god era was established, she would sacrifice chaos to nothingness. She should not have anything to do with the gods who came after the new god era. That dream made her understand that sacrificing chaos was probably not the end of her life. She would return to this world again, but at that time she didn't know why destiny arranged for her to return to this world again. In fact, she had always had questions, but the precognitive dream never told her any more information. She just dreamed about the young water god over and over again. In her dreams day after day, and in her daily interactions with the young man, she gradually experienced emotions of joy, sadness, bitterness, sweetness, and even pain. She has never had such an experience. Although those emotions were very weak, they shook the god of light's innocent heart. Especially the last dream. In the last dream, she was getting married far away, and the young man traveled thousands of miles to search for her. He even broke the earth and created the sea for her, and even gave her the gift of turning against his scales to propose marriage. After waking up, her cheeks were soaked, and it took her a long time to realize that she had shed tears. She never cried. Who her husband was originally unimportant, but because of those tears, she began to want to really like someone. She wanted to truly experience the happiness, sadness, sweetness, grievance, and even pain in the dream, instead of just feeling a little bit. She also wants to understand the young man's thoughtfulness, tenderness, depression, struggle, and pain. Maybe she didn't learn what love was until Chengyu's life. Maybe she had a perception of it as early as those precognitive dreams in the prehistoric era. But at that time, I was very ignorant about everything. For the first time in her life, she wanted to cultivate a personality and experience the rich emotions of this world like a normal creature. That wish became stronger and stronger in the memories of those dreams year after year, and finally became uncontrollable. She personally arranged her 17th reincarnation. Then, if the wooden door opens, the human race moves to live, Shaoan reaches nirvana, and she sacrifices for the human race. Several years later, when the spirit body was reborn from the light, she successfully entered 17 reincarnations. In the last life of reincarnation, I, who had no memory of Zhu Ti, learned all the emotions of mortals and personally experienced the love and hate of separation from young people. She is a complete Qingyu and a complete city. The self as a god and the self as a mortal were perfectly integrated in this last life. At this time, sitting under the first peak of the sky cabinet, clarifying the causes and consequences, she understood everything. It turns out that the god who has a destiny with the water god is himself. But so what? I thought the only gap between them was the difference between humans and gods. But when she became a god again, she realized that, even if they were gods, they could not stay together. She did have a destiny with him, but her return was not to complete this destiny with him, but to sacrifice again to bring stability to the 8 wastelands. In the ancient times long ago, she once said firmly to Zhao Shi, "I just want to cultivate another personality. By then the human race will live in peace and I have completed my mission. God really has no control over how I will practice in the future." At that time, she really thought that she would be free from now on, and learning the 7 emotions of the human race was to better capture her sweetheart. She didn't expect that God asked her to learn the 7 emotions of the human race, but it was to make her give up her sweetheart. Destiny. Destiny is really grinding. In the past, she had sacrificed for the human race without any emotion. She just felt that she was fulfilling her mission, so she was very decisive in accepting that fate. Probably dissatisfied with her lack of intention and desire, destiny made her have those precognitive dreams, which aroused her curiosity and made her take the initiative to practice the 7 emotions. Now that I know the 7 emotions, I have a true concern in this world, and I have a heart to fight against this fate. However, because I understand the 7 emotions and the human race, I cannot struggle or abandon my mission. How sad and ironic. She covered her heart and was speechless in pain. Perhaps destiny is to let her understand all this. God does not want her to serve only as a tool to realize heaven, but wants her to truly understand the meaning of love and life, the meaning of protection and sacrifice, and the meaning of death. Perhaps the God who understands all this is the God recognized by destiny. This is so compassionate and cruel. She sat there quietly. 2 lines of tears fell down her cheeks, but she didn't notice. She finally understood the pain Xiaowan went through on the eve of Ruomu's door opening. She was finally able to understand the heart of Xiaowan, who said, "I can't regret it and I don't dare to." And this time, she also needs to be like Xiaowan back then. Even if it hurts, she has to make a choice. A heartbreaking wail came from the snow cave on the 4th peak of Tiangui. Xiaolingye was covered in blood and was tied to the cave wall by thorn chains. She had been tortured for an hour. The man in green clothes about a foot away stood facing her with his hands behind his back, as if he was not the one who tortured her. But the 2 daggers used to inflict Lingqi's punishment on Au clearly obeyed his orders. The dagger didn't cut out the flesh, it just cut her body one by one, causing her pain, but not fatally. Au once again gathered the strength to beg for mercy from the man. "I don't know. She is a god. I thought she is just a immortal lord. Please let me go." The man looked at her coldly and suddenly sneered. "What about gods? What about humans? If she were immortal, you could torture her." Au was in pain and regretful, but what she regretted was not that she tortured and killed a mortal. She still felt that if the other person was just immortal, she would have been left to his own devices. She only regretted that her cultivation was too shallow and she did not realize that the woman was a god. He rashly attacked the woman and brought such a huge disaster to himself. A woman is both a god and the wife of His Highness, so in the future His Highness will definitely know what he has done to the woman. How will His Highness see himself and how will he treat himself? Au couldn't help but feel jealous and afraid. But when the dagger pierced her body again, all these frightening emotions were suppressed by the severe pain. In order to survive, she could only keep pleading, "God, I know I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Please let me go." The man had a heart of stone and was not moved by her plea. Instead, he raised his hand and looked at her as if she were a dead person. When the man pressed down his right hand slightly, the dagger in his belly pierced deeper. She was in unbearable pain, but more importantly, she was frightened. At that moment, she felt the powerlessness of being a weakling very clearly. Just when she desperately thought that she was about to die, a mysterious figure suddenly walked into the snow cave. Man in clothes. The man pressed the man in green's hand down and restrained him. "Zhao Shi, don't kill her, still useful." The man in green didn't stop immediately. The man in black clothes sighed, "It's for your majesty's sake." The man in Xing-yi looked at the man in Xian-yi for a long time, then withdrew his murderous hand. glanced at you coldly, and then stepped out of the snow cave with a flourish of sleeves. The man in green's last look made Ayu feel cold all over, but she also understood that she should be able to survive. She breathed a sigh of relief, regained consciousness, and fainted. The moment Zhao Shi walked out of the snow cave, he stopped. He squinted his eyes slightly, and his eyes fell on the falling snow that was still in midair. He reached out and touched the ice crystals in front of him. He was silent for a moment, then turned around to ask for help. Lin, who followed Ayu out, said, "It's still here. What's going on?" Lin glanced around. "It's not that it's still, it's that time has stopped in the entire 7 peaks of the sky cabinet." Zhao Shi understood. "Is this what your majesty did?" He frowned slightly. "What is your majesty going to do?" The snowy area of Tangqi was as quiet as a painting on paper. Lin paused for a while. She should go say goodbye to the water god. Zhao Shi was surprised. "Farewell." He suppressed the anguish in his heart. Chang Yu has a deep affection for Lian Song, and didn't she come back just to get married with the water god? But what did you say? Say goodbye? Lin looked at the second peak standing quietly in the distance. She has a relationship with the water god, but she did not come back to have a relationship with the water god. Zhao Shi was stunned. "What do you mean?" Lin just looked into the distance quietly, with a rare hint of compassion in his usually cold expression. He did not answer Zhao Shi's question. How many more times will his punishment be over? Was it 2 or 3 times? Having just woken up from the pain of the cold waterfall, even His Highness was in a daze. He shook his head and calmed down his thoughts, only to realize that something was not quite right. The 7 peaks of Tangqi, the mountain is a secluded mountain, and the valley is an empty valley. It has always been very pure, but in this valley, the sound of gurgling water falling from the waterfall into the cold pool has never stopped, but at this time there is no sound of water. Can't hear it either. He opened his eyes. When he saw everything in front of him clearly, Lian Song suspected that he was dreaming. The waterfall imprisoning him was still, hanging on the cliff like a huge piece of white water essence. The cold pool under his feet was also still, and the water from the waterfall hit the rocks. It was frozen in midair. The entire valley was filled with stagnant, non-falling, dreamlike snow, and what was even more dreamy was the person at the end of the line of sight. A slender woman stood opposite the cold pool. She was wearing a golden dress. Her long hair was untied and reached her ankles. She had a plain face. Only the brow bone of her right eyebrow was covered with tiny golden beads of light. Although she was not wearing makeup, but it was so beautiful that it frightened him. Their eyes met in midair. She smiled at him with her eyes bent in the innocent manner he was most familiar with. Then she held up her skirt and waded into the water, lifted up the frozen cold waterfall with her delicate hands, and stood in front of him. The still water flow was disturbed by her bare hands, turning into a series of small beads and falling into the cold pool, making a clear and moist sound in the silence. She looked up at him, smiling, but with tears in her eyes. She stretched out her hand to touch his cheek and called him softly, "Brother Lenson." She used his favorite soft and coquettish voice. Is this a dream? His mind became more and more groggy, and he couldn't tell the difference. He didn't want to tell. Even if it's just a dream, isn't that great? He smiled with his eyes closed, leaned his face gently on her hand, and asked her softly, "Why are you here?" He opened his eyes and looked at her. Am I dreaming? Yes, he must be here. In a dream, this is the 2nd peak of the sky cabinet. If it wasn't a dream, how could she appear here? I'm just dreaming. She also smiled, but tears fell from the corners of her eyes. The 2 faint traces of water on her cheeks instinctively made him heartache. He wanted to reach out to wipe her tears, but when he moved his hands, he remembered that both hands were covered with tears. She noticed the jingle of the chains, glanced at them, and reached out to hold his wrist. The iron chain, which was made of the essence of thunder and lightning, could not be burned by the sky fire, turned into nothingness in a burst of golden light. He was free, but because he was hung here for 6 days and nights, his physical strength was temporarily weak, and he fell. Hug him quickly. His head became dizzy even more, and he vaguely saw her raising her hand slightly, and a silver door of light appeared behind the water curtain. He thought he was really dreaming. It seemed like a long time passed. When His Highness woke up, he felt a coolness coming from the originally burning wound on his back that had been split by the water blade. In the comfortable coolness, someone was gently touching his back. The touch brought what he felt was not pain, but numbness. He opened his eyes, tilted his head slightly calmly, and found himself in a stone cave, lying on a soft couch, with his shirt taken off and a snow-white bandage wrapped around his shoulders. A sleeve with a lotus pattern embroidered with gold and silver threads was spread out beside him, trembling slightly. It was a pair of soft hands, gently pressing against his back. The exposed skin felt a few drops of warm moisture, like a rain destined to end in vain. He was stunned for a moment before he realized that those were Qingyu's tears. Her hand moved to his unbandaged shoulder, covering it gently. Her body moved closer to him, and her lips covered his injured area. It was as if she was afraid of hurting him, but it was a very light touch. At the same time, warm and wet tears fell on his shoulders and back. He was in a trance just now and didn't realize anything. Now he was awake and felt her tears and touch, and his body couldn't help but tremble. He turned around and held her hand. She was startled, looked up confusedly, saw his bright eyes, and immediately sat up. He relaxed her hand, but still squeezed her wrist weakly. "What are you doing?" She looked around and talked to him, and with her free hand she helped him pull the quilt next to her and covered him. "I'll help you treat your wound. It's a little cold. You cover it." He glanced at the quilt on his body, feeling funny, and looked at her. "Does it require kissing to treat the wound?" Her face turned red, and she replied in a low voice without confidence. I'm just afraid that you'll be in pain, so I'll give you a blowjob." He nodded. "Yeah, keep making it up." She also felt embarrassed, covered half of her face, and whispered, "It doesn't make any difference if you blow and kiss or kiss." As a result, when she looked up, she saw that the gauze on his shoulders had leaked due to his turning over and movements just now. When there was blood, she immediately panicked. "Why is it bleeding again? Does it still hurt?" She was about to check, but he grabbed her wrist and pulled her down. "Don't worry about it, it's just a minor injury." He put his arm around her and made her lie in his arms, comforting her, added, "It doesn't hurt." She was doubtful. "But you fainted just now." He said warmly, "I was just a little tired just now. I slept for a while and I feel better now." He kissed her forehead and diverted her attention. "Did Suji bring you here?" "It was Jichin who failed and asked you to advance. Are you awake?" The topic was successfully changed. She remained silent for a long time, and then she spoke hoarsely for a long time. "It's none of Jichin's business." She raised her head and looked at him, her apricot-like eyes wide open. There was a mist in his eyes, moist and hazy, with a sadness that he couldn't understand. She raised her hand again, touched his face, and looked at him for a moment, as if they were about to separate again at the next moment, and she wanted to imprint his appearance deeply into her heart. "From a long time ago," she whispered, "I've been waiting for you, looking forward to our meeting. I've been waiting for you for a long, long time." She closed her eyes, hugged his arm, and sighed softly. "I miss you so much." "Yes, so I came to find you." They were words of love about missing him, but there was something strange about them. While they made his heart flutter, they also felt indescribably frightened and uneasy. When she said these words, she looked like she had not only been waiting for him for 7 years, but a longer and endless time. He instinctively felt that something was wrong. He wanted to think deeply about it, but his mind was in chaos and he couldn't think about it in detail. Maybe because this was a dream, it was his expectation for her. Maybe he had been subconsciously hoping that they would be destined from a long time ago and expected her to say such things, so she said such things. He put these thoughts behind him, smiled, and teased her. "But when we first met, you didn't even want to sell me an umbrella." Her eyes were still so moist. She looked at him with attachment. "That's just because I forgot." She repeated softly, I forgot what I have been waiting for you. Her eyebrows were dyed red, and there was a little moisture at the end of her eyes, which was sadness. But she smiled. That smile was fragile and beautiful, like a lotus bathing in the rain, arousing pity. But even if I forgot, she smiled again. I liked you at first sight at that time. Thinking about this, why is my brother so good-looking? Even now, she touched his cheek with her fingers, looking at him with eyes that were as tender as water and full of light, like the moon reflected in the water. I still feel that the real Saburo is so beautiful. He raised his eyebrows, intending to remind her that she had forgotten about him immediately after they first met. When they met again a year later, it was only through his reminder that she remembered him. However, in order to please him, she insisted on saying that she had just met him at first glance. I like him as soon as I meet him, and there is no such thing as a bad guy. When he heard her last words, saying that the real Saburo was so beautiful, he was stunned, and it took him a long time to find his voice. What did you call me? She blinked. My father is the 7th in the family, and my mother calls him Chilong. You are the 3rd in the family, so I call you Sanning. Isn't it just right? She looked at him meekly. The golden beads of light at the brow bone of her right eyebrow seemed particularly bright in the dim cave. The eyes under her long eyebrows were pure and untainted, and were more pure than anything else in the world. He couldn't help but stretched out his hand to touch and whispered, It's just right. Sanling, he thought about the name again. This is not the name of Bohuang. It is very special. But don't you like to call me Brother Lanson? Why? Stop barking. She held his hand next to her eyes and closed her eyes for a moment, because Brother Liansan can be Brother Liansan to many people, but Sanling is only my Sanling. And in the beginning, when I fell in love with you, I wanted to call you Saburo. She opened her eyes, looked at him innocently, touched his hand with her cheek again, pursed her lips as if she was a little shy, but in the end she chose boldly tell him, You may not know. She breathed out, I have liked you since a long time ago, Saburo. After saying this, her face turned red little by little, like a heavy branch. Petal lilies are originally snow-white buds, but after they bloom, they have red petals. He liked her shyness and boldness, so much so that he was almost seduced by her. It would be nice if everything was as she said, but it wasn't like that after all. He pinched her blushing face. You dare to say that you liked me a long time ago. A long time ago? Weren't you so stupid that you didn't understand anything and left me alone to suffer unrequited love until you tortured me to death? Did you just mercifully decide to stay with me? Faced with his accusation, she seemed to be stunned, and it took her a while to come back to her senses, with a look of frustration on her face. I'm not talking about that time, but I was indeed stupid at that time, she said. She smiled sheepishly. Don't blame me. She raised her eyes and looked at him, her pure eyes showing the sadness that he couldn't understand again. I said it a long time ago. It's worse than that. Early on, I dreamed of you before you even knew me. This was something he had never thought about. Dream of me? Dream of me? What? She took the initiative to get close to him and buried her face in his shoulder. I dreamed of us being together. After a moment of silence, she raised her head again. The ends of her eyes were stained red again, and her pupils were covered with a thin layer of the thin tear film stained the eyelashes with a slight blink. Her expression was also a little sad, like a butterfly with wet wings. Under those extremely clear eyes, there was a dull pain that could not take off. He couldn't help but touch her eyes again. Isn't it a good dream about us being together? Why do you seem to be crying? She shook her head, held his hand, put it to her lips, and kissed her gently. I like you. The words were ethereal, almost unreal, more than anything else in the world. If you want more, I am the one who likes you most in the world, so. She paused and did not finish the sentence. He loved her innocence, her instinctive closeness and complete dependence on him, and her unabashedly frank love words. Hearing her stop there, he couldn't help but hold her waist and lower his head. The voice urged, So what? Me? She looked at him deeply, and her soft arms suddenly wrapped around his neck. So, Don't forget he didn't understand why she had such strange worries. He looked at her for a while, then pressed a kiss on the corner of her pale red lips, stroked her back comfortingly, and assured her in a low voice, "You are my wife. You are the lover I worked so hard to get back. How could I forget you?" She was made to laugh by him. Being deliberate is not a good word. Who would say that he is being deliberate? He kissed her forehead lovingly and held her wrist that still wore his dragon scales, without replying to her. They were so close that they could smell each other's breath on the jade pillow, and the cold fragrance of bai chinon was intertwined with the warm fragrance of flowers. She raised her head slightly and met his eyes very close. "You said you would never forget me. I like it very much. Don't forget me in the past, and don't forget me tonight." It was a somewhat inexplicable sentence. But he didn't have time to think about it because she closed her eyes and took the initiative to approach his lips. "Don't forget me tonight, Saburo." She repeated softly to his lips and then took the initiative to kiss him. His mind was dizzy and he could think of nothing else. The only thing he knew was her hugging him like a vine and her young but passionate kisses. They intertwined in this lonely, quiet, undisturbed, and unknown time and space. She spread her body under him like a sacrifice. The night is long, poetically tender and sad, but also beautiful. That night, 7 great formations of the Great Wilderness suddenly rose from the Gongzi land in the middle of the 8 wastelands. The brilliance of the formation shone, and the light enveloped the entire Gongzi, blocking the approach of the 5 races. The place in the middle of heaven and earth was originally a place where no gods could set foot, and now not even a mosquito could fly in. Emperor Donghua and his subordinate immortal Chonglin stood outside the first formation. The emperor raised his eyes and stared at Gongzi, who was covered in dazzling golden light, with a slightly condensed expression. "It's still a step too late. Gugu has closed the mountain. Come back." Immortal Chonglin, who is familiar with the emperor's style of conduct, tentatively made a suggestion. Maybe the emperor can force his way in? The emperor thought for a moment and asked him, "Isn't this a bit impolite?" Chonglin told the truth. "Politeness is indeed impolite, but you don't seem to care much about the impolite emperor." The emperor thought for a moment and said, "These 7 great formations were all laid out by Shaowan for Gugu in the prehistoric era. Shaowan's formations are unparalleled in the world. It would be quite laborious even for me to get through." "Forget it," he said decisively. He turned around and prepared to go back. Chonglin hurriedly followed. "But didn't the emperor say that God Zuti woke up because he foresaw the disaster in Bohuang, so you must make this trip today?" The emperor did not stop. She closed the door as soon as she came back. "Presumably the matter is not critical. She has already made a plan." Chonglin heard that it made sense, but he couldn't help but still be a little worried. But what if it's just that Zhu Tixin didn't think things through well, so he closed Gugu? The emperor shrugged. After all, he is a prehistoric god. He is of the same generation as me, so he is not like this. Seeing that the emperor was so relieved, Chonglin had no choice but to relax and follow the emperor away in the clouds. The center of heaven and earth is Gongzi, the center of Gongzi is Gugu, and the center of Gugu is Zhu Ti's retreat, the Jade Chamber of Guanan. The Guanan Chamber is hidden in the Lanin Cave beside the Changxing Sea. It is the place with the most spiritual energy in Gongzi. The Guanan Chamber has been quiet for 210,000 years since Zhu Ti sacrificed to chaos. At this moment, painful sobs came from the Jade Room that had been quiet for 210,000 years. The 4 great envoys stood guard in front of the cave, their expressions solemn. When Zhu Ti returned to her throne, the sleeping Just Lian Shuang and the emperor's daughter Sang Shui were also awakened by the bright light that shone in the world. After waking up, they rushed back to Gugu as soon as possible. But at that time, Zhu Ti had already entered the stone chamber, and Yin Lin had also sneaked into the Sea of Immortality, leaving only Zhao Shi guarding the door of the cave. The 2 of them found out from Zhao Shi that the Lord wanted to strip the memories of his last mortal life out of his immortal body, so they entered the stone chamber for seclusion. But why Your Majesty wanted to strip away the memory of his last life, even Zhao Shi didn't know. After Yin Lin came out of the Sea of Immortality, The two wanted to ask Lin, but suddenly the sound of His Majesty's crying and moaning came from the stone chamber. In the past, if Your Majesty was in danger, Zhao Shi would always be the first to rush forward. However, at this time, Zhao Shi was leaning against the huge rock at the entrance of the cave with his back to them, without moving. Shui Jing, who had always been observing the clear cave from all sides, paused for a moment and stopped rushing towards the cave. However, Shuang Hebu Gai, who was impatient and irritable, rushed straight in, but as expected, Lin dodged him. He held his sword in front of the cave door to stop him. Shuang He was knocked back 3 feet by the sword energy and quickly took out his sword to stop himself. Then he heard Lin say coldly, "It is not easy to peel the memory out of the immortal body. If the memory is integrated into the bone, blood, and soul, the stripped memory the process is tantamount to peeling off skin and cramps, cutting out flesh and bones. Your Majesty, she is just enduring the pain that she must go through. Only by surviving these pains can she successfully peel off those memories. Not only will you not help her if you go in at this time, on the contrary, it will disturb her, and if your work fails, what will you do?" Although Shuang He had a short temper, he had feared and worshipped Lin, the leader of the 4 divine envoys, since the prehistoric era. Lin's face sank slightly, and he obeyed, so even though he was knocked back by Lin's sword energy, even though he was 3 feet away, he only dared to rub his chest and said, I just heard that Your Majesty seemed to be in pain, and I was a little anxious." Shui Yi sighed at Shuang He's useless appearance, took 2 steps forward and came to Lin, frowned and asked in confusion, "If Your Majesty doesn't like the memory of the last life, there are many forgetting pills and forgetting water in this world. Help her forget. I can't understand why she would choose such a painful way to strip away her memories from her immortal body. Does it have to be like this?" Lin was silent for a moment. She has her own reasons. If she can successfully peel off those memories, I will tell you. Shui looked at him for a while and nodded. There was another burst of mourning in the Jade Chamber, which was extremely sad and painful. Lin clenched the hilt of the sword in his hand. He couldn't bear to hear this cry, but he had to endure it. Zhuti had her own reasons, and only the 2 of them in the world knew that reason. It was arranged by the god of light for the god of water regarding the ending of their fate. Does it have to be like this? Shui asked him. In fact, he also asked Zhuti just before she entered the stone chamber. At that time, they had just rushed back to Gugu from Tiangoe. She looked at the distant mountains and whispered back to him, "I am satisfied that I can say goodbye for the last time. He will only think that it is all just a dream. In fact, everything ends here. So far, nothing bad has happened. But I made an agreement with him. After the waterboarding is over, he will come to me, take me away, and travel around the world to be with me for the rest of my life. I am unable to fulfill the agreement, but I can give him a Chinyu. Let that Chinyu fulfill the agreement with him." This is why she chose to strip away her memories. There is indeed a way. After she learned the emotion of compassion, she reincarnated several times. When she returned from death, out of compassion, she stripped off her memories and refined those stripped memories into memory beads and placed them in the same memory, in a doll body similar to hers. In those few lives, every doll replaced her properly, blinding her family and friends who loved her deeply but lost her early. They thought that the doll was her, and they lived a peaceful life with the doll. But the problem is that at that time, her emotions were incomplete and her memory was not closely connected with the immortal body. It was not painful to separate the memory from the immortal body and refine it into memory beads. But this time, the memory deep in the bone marrow is not so easy to be stripped away. In addition, there is another more difficult thing. He had to remind her, the water god is different from ordinary people. He will definitely be able to see that the Qingyu you sent to him is not the former Qingyu, but just a doll. She lowered her eyes slightly. There is still a mortal body of mine at the bottom of the sea of immortality. It was a body made by Sieming as a spare. I will create a new soul and turn into jade. That's where she said it, a little choked. She paused, calmed her voice, and continued, I will put Chengyu's memory into the new soul and condense it into a soul bead. At that time, you will put the soul bead into the mortal body, send her to the mortal world. He won't see it. When she said the last half of the words, her voice became much calmer, but her slightly turned face was stained with tears. He was quiet for a long time. He had not been emotional for a long time, but at that time, he suggested to her impulsively, "You can't let go of the water god. There are still 30,000 years before the catastrophe, why not?" But she interrupted him, "I will fall asleep to regain my lost spiritual power and cultivation." Yes, he neglected this point. She still had spiritual power and cultivation that needed to be restored. If she were any other prehistoric god, she might be able to sleep for thousands of years, but she is the god of light and foreknowledge, and stable mental power is the source of her spiritual power. She must spend a long time sleeping to stabilize her mental power, reserve sufficient spiritual power, so that it can cope with this sacrifice 30,000 years later. He was speechless for a moment. My fate with him can only end in Chengyu's lifetime. He heard her say this. Her back was turned to him, and he couldn't see her expression clearly. There was silence between the two of them for a long time. Finally, he heard her sigh softly. He loves Chengyu, so I will give him Chengyu. This is finally, I was able to give him something. Those were the last words she said to him. A heartbreaking cry of pain suddenly came from the jade chamber, shaking the entire Gugu mountain forest. Lin suddenly came back to his senses. Zhao Shi and the other three also looked anxious. The painful cry was followed by a cry full of blood and tears. The cry was so painful and desperate that the world was moved. Zhongzhe's spiritual aura seemed to feel the sadness and powerlessness in the cry. The whole girl suddenly felt. It began to rain heavily. After a long time, the crying sound finally stopped. Lin stopped the other three divine envoys and went into the cave alone. In the jade room, a girl in a golden dress lay pale on the ground, with a small golden bead rolling down beside her. Lin picked up the girl and placed her gently and steadily on the jade bed beside her. He knelt down in front of the jade bed, bowed solemnly 3 times, then picked up the pearl and walked out of the jade room. The god of light fell into a deep sleep, and the light of the 7 great formations guarding Zhongzhe dimmed. The 4 divine envoys looked at the dim light on the horizon. They waited for her return, and then they needed to take care of her sleep. This was the mission of the angels. And no matter what, she will wake up before the fate of heaven. Because this is the prayer of the gods who lived in ancient times. It's the way of heaven. It is also the fate of the god of light. End of Lotus Steps Book 2.